So this week in the UK, we held a referendum to vote on whether the United Kingdom would remain a part of the EU or European Union. The results are in, and as I'm sure most of you are aware, the majority voted in favour of leaving the EU. By a small margin, yes, but that was what the vote said. So that seems to be what's going to happen. I voted to remain. I have no problem telling you this because I wouldn't have voted that way if I didn't think it was the right way to vote at the time. However, regardless of how you voted, this is the situation we are in now. And things are about to change in the UK. A lot of that is probably going to have to do with our own government. As far as I'm concerned, the root cause of our problems in the UK is not immigration or refugee crisis in other countries or benefit scroungers or the EU stealing all our money. It's our governments, our media, our big businesses, banks, the people in power, the establishment who are responsible for the austerity in this country. So I'm not here to bash anybody that voted leave, regardless of why they voted for it, because the people in my mind who are to blame are the fearmongers, the people that redirect our fear and hatred towards one another at the bottom instead of where it should be directed, which is at the top. And the only way we're going to survive leaving the EU, whether you think it was the right or wrong decision, is to work together to make this country a better place and have our voices heard. So don't just sit on Twitter angrily tweeting for 2 days after the referendum. It's time to be politically active and actually help this country be a better place for everybody. I know how difficult that can be, however. It can feel very despairing with everything that's going on. So I thought I would film this video to recommend to you some books and films that may inspire and invigorate political activism in you. The first book I want to share with you is somewhat historical and less of a comment on contemporary politics, and that is The Honour Code: How Moral Revolutions Happen by Kwame Anthony Appiah. And I've chosen this book to share with you because my biggest pet peeve when it comes to politics and having discussion about politics is when the statement, "things never change," is said to me. Things change all the time. Things literally just changed a few hours ago. We are now leaving the EU. That, to many of us, may be a negative change, but it's a change nonetheless, and unfortunately, negative changes have been happening for decades in this country. However, positive change is possible too. This book looks at 3 different practices that were considered honourable at their time in their country and how those were overturned and perceptions of what was right and wrong and how to organise society were changed. It deals with transatlantic slavery, it deals with the culture of duelling, and it deals with Chinese foot binding, all of which were legal and rampant practices in their time but are now no longer considered acceptable by most. In the 4th chapter, the author deals with a contemporary issue, which is the honour killings of women, and coming from the perspective of how public opinion changed to alter the first 3 incidents I mentioned, tries to explore how we can fight honour killings of women. This book might not seem specific, but it is inspiring. It does indicate that change happens, but it also makes the point, which is the important point that I want to mention, and that is, no, change doesn't happen if you just wait around for it. Change is not handed to you. Change is not a gift bestowed upon you by the wealthy. Change happens when people demand change and when people take change and when we take charge. The wealthy and those that benefit from our current society will push back, but we just have to push harder, and the only way to do that is to do it together en masse. Change can happen. Fantastic book, interesting look into some different historical practices, and a really quick and engaging read, so there we go. The next book is currently sitting for tied first place in best books I have read this year, and that is The Establishment and How They Get Away With It by Owen Jones. Owen Jones is a British journalist who in fact has a YouTube channel, so if you'd like to consume some bite-sized media and get a feel for his politics, then I'll link that down below as well. But this book is, as you can guess, all about the establishment. It looks at events in our recent political history, from the miners' strike to the Daily Mail hacking phones to the tax avoidance of rich businessmen and politicians, and gives a detailed but engaging analysis of who exactly the establishment are, how they hold their power, the way in which they function in the UK specifically, and why we need to fight against them. Like I said, change is never handed to you. It's something you need to fight for, and this book may invigorate you to do so. It will make you angry, but it will also inspire you to want to make a difference. And in his conclusion, Owen Jones also gives some well thought through, legitimate, beginning indications of how we can go about that. Now, one of the ways in the past and now people have come together to fight for their rights is through the trade union movement. That's a topic that Owen Jones also touches on, the way in which if we use and support trade unions appropriately, they can function to support workers in this country and represent them in government. But if you'd like an easy, bite-sized but fascinating look at an aspect of the trade union movement, then this book here, Inspiring Women, was put together by the STUC Women's Committee. The STUC being the Scottish Trade Unions Council, and this is a look at the history of the Women's Committee in the Trade Unions Council, the amazing changes and progress they've made within the Trade Unions Council, the fights they've had to go through, the struggles they've overcome. And the book itself is the product of women in the Trade Union Council coming together to make something, to celebrate what they have achieved, but also to highlight what they still need to do. Like I said, incredibly easy to dip in and out of. It's full of timelines and old leaflets and posters and the role of women workers in the suffrage movement. It also covers the STUC's role in fighting for equal pay, for women's right to choose, for LGBT rights, for its support of the miners' strikes, and its stance against poll tax. This book is about people coming together to make a difference, and that's what we have to do now. But lastly, for the books, it's something a little bit different, and that is a poetry collection. I think the one thing that poetry does beyond all other formats of literature is really embody a feeling in such few words. So I think that poetry certainly has a role to play in inspiring political activity. So I have to recommend to you Michael Rosen's Fighters for Life selected poems. Now, I was first introduced to Michael Rosen as a child through his children's poetry, and I have remained an avid fan of his work ever since. This collection is all about the struggles that people have gone through in the past and in recent years, the oppression and struggles they have been victim to, but also the rights they have fought for, and it is an incredibly moving collection all about having your voice heard. I did say I would mention some films, however, because I know sometimes we just need something that we can consume in roughly 2 hours, which isn't books for me anyway. I'm a slow reader. So the 2 films that I want to recommend to you in this video, to keep it concise, are firstly Pride. I have mentioned Pride before. It's one of my all-time favourite films. I only saw it for the first time last year. It is quite a recent release. I've already seen it about 5-6 times because it is that good, and it stands up to a rewatch every time. This film is set during the miners' strike in Britain under the government of Margaret Thatcher, and it tells the true story of a group of LGBT young people who came together to support the miners in their time of dire need. It is a wonderful, uplifting, heartening and inspiring film about solidarity, about different groups coming together, about one oppressed group recognising the oppression of others and saying, I will not stand for that, I will not stand for the oppression of anyone, and the demonstration that we are stronger together. This film will make you laugh, it will make you cry, and I cannot recommend it more highly. But if you're looking for something even more non-fiction, although the story of Pride is a true story, I have to recommend to you a documentary, quite a recent documentary, that I actually went to see in the cinema about 2 weeks ago, and that is Where to Invade Next by Michael Moore. You've probably heard of Michael Moore. He's definitely a documentary maker that divides people, but his most recent documentary had a strangely positive tone compared to some of his previous documentaries. And in Where to Invade Next, Michael Moore visits different countries in Europe to look for ways in which their society organises and governs itself that he thinks America should aspire to. So he visits somewhere like Finland, which has a celebrated education system. He visits Slovenia, where higher education is free to one and all. He visits Italy, where maternity leave is compulsory according to law, which it is not in the United States, and many, many more. He's not saying these countries are perfect, but he's saying that, look, we can do things better. These people do it this way and this is working, so why can't we? And one of the points he makes in the documentary is that a lot of these things that he sees in these European countries used to exist in America. And obviously, we've been talking about the EU referendum in the UK, but a lot of the issues he explored in this film are relevant to those of us in the UK as well. Somewhere along the line, unfortunately, these things were taken away from us, but it is possible to get them back. And I hope you feel like that after this video, and I hope you check out some of these books and movies. I can completely sympathise if you're feeling despondent this week. But don't let this momentum end. Don't let the hatred spread. We can do better.